Welcome to the guest expert session in Found Her Fire in the month of January. And today I have with you, for you, the most fabulous of humans, the amazing Gillian Riley, the author of 10 Permissions. And if you want to find out a little bit more about Gillian's background, then do go and listen to our podcast episode together as well, because the expertise and experience you bring in the room, Gillian, is blinking amazing. And we have had a number of conversations because, as you will all gather, myself and Gillian are co-collaborating, co-creating, co-curating our fabulous in-person day. Oh, well, it's an actual evening and day on the 29th and 30th of this month, which we will tell you about later if we have a little bit more time. But I'm going to hand over to Gillian and she's going to talk to us all about how we give ourselves permission to find our fire. Welcome, Gillian.
Goodness, thanks, Sarah. That's quite an introduction. Sarah, when you and I met and started sort of talking about your content and my content and this concept of sort of finding your fire, I felt like in that phrase you were articulating something that was kind of central to this theme of permission and of self-permission and of what's on the other side of permission, if you will, which is this kind of fiery, juicy authenticity and authority that I think a lot of us often feel we're not allowed to access. So we've done a lot of talking and thinking about the connections between my work on permission and your work around finding your fire. And I think it's a great moment to kind of knit those together in an overview and a taste of what I think we're going to keep exploring together for quite some time. What's the connection between permission and fire? Why am I so obsessed with permission? I'm going to tell you a little more about myself as we go along. And as Sarah said, there's more about me on the podcast. But basically, I've been kind of working around the world on helping people navigate profound change. I'm originally from the States, but I'm currently based in Cape Town, South Africa. And many, many years ago, I came over here to be a part of this country's first elections. And that started a 30-year career in human behavior change on how we change and why we don't. And I think central to that for me was this theme of self-permission. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go along. I loved this Tim Ferriss post. When I saw it, I was like, yes. I think he could have said, if you want to find your fire, stop asking for permission. It would have been exactly on point. But I think what we're going to talk about today is, for me, when I think about finding your fire, there's something in that that's around authority, that's around voice and opinions and ideas and sort of the fullest expression of self and the backing of the fullest expression of self that I think for a lot of us feels just out of bounds, just sort of beyond the scope of what we've ever been told was allowed. And when I started sharing some of this content around the 10 permissions and around permissions with women, what started to come up in a lot of those was this theme of, gosh, my whole life has been unconsciously permission seeking, looking for space to be accepted and approved, and being the person I thought I should be instead of the one that I wanted to be. So much so that a lot of the women that I work with now, when you start talking about want and desire, it's like, I haven't been there in a very, very long time. So for me, this whole idea of finding that voice, finding that presence starts with self-permission, because finding your fire to me is kind of overcoming self-limiting, authorizing yourself to act, even when it feels scary, because of course it's going to feel scary. I think it feels scary for everybody of every walk of life, but particularly when, your identity and your self has, from the time that you were very little, been shaped by being acceptable, being approved of, doing the things you were supposed to do, doing the things that garnered everybody's applause and approval. So, when you seek that permission, and again, that's what I've heard in a lot of my conversations about this, was this kind of unconscious framing of, am I allowed? And it can play out quietly, silently. It can sort of hover over you as you're walking into a room and trying to figure out sort of how you behave in a way that feels acceptable. Am I allowed to wear what I'm wearing? Am I allowed to say the things that I want to say? Am I allowed to, share my boldest opinions, air my strongest opinions? Or am I always sort of, in some ways, I kind of call it shape shifting or self-limiting in order to garner acceptance and approval? When you shift to self-permission and you kind of own your authority and activate your agency to lead into rooms, to lead into conversations in a way that feels most authentic and natural. That doesn't mean you go in guns blazing. It doesn't mean that it's licensed to be offensive or out there. It means it's not a constant process of quiet questioning and quiet sort of adaptation in order to be the thing that you think other people want you to be. And this is something that's Sarah and I spoke about just last week, and I think it's so important, is that what we're talking about here is a practice. It's kind of undoing a lifetime of conditioning that's been shaping your own sense of who you were allowed to be, what you were allowed to say, how far you were allowed to go. It's not one pep talk that says, I'm allowed to be the biggest, boldest version of myself. It's a constant practice of noticing where you consciously and unconsciously withhold permission from yourself. That sort of self-limiting, gauging acceptability at all times. It's starting to become aware of that and to give language to that, to notice that, to start to go, hey, wait a second, why am I often leaving meetings having not said what I want to say? Why am I often sort of carrying around a massive mental load about what I did say in a meeting, because now I'm worrying that I might have said too much. And then it's beginning to redirect that pattern with a series of new choices. I talk a lot about kind of little micro permissions that start to redirect and repattern. And I'm starting work with a neuroscientist around this, where you're actually self-directing your own sort of process of repatterning, undoing a lifetime of behavior that has told you who you were allowed to be or not. And so I think a lot of the work that Sarah and I are doing moving forward is around this practice, so that Find Your Fire is more than, a motto or a feel-good sort of sense of self-belief. It's actually a constructive process of self-direction. It's moving towards the things that you want, towards becoming the version of yourself that feels right for the moment, as opposed to sort of sitting in a place of behaving the way you should. And I think, as I said, I want to know if any of this sort of feels recognizable to you, because what I've heard, what I know from my own life, what I experience all the time is our conditioning has very little to do with fire. In fact, our conditioning is precisely the opposite. It's to be a good girl. So, if for me, fire is around speaking up, well, no, then you're kind of showing off and trying to take up too much space. If you take credit for something, you're being sort of selfish and owning sort of too much of the responsibility for things. If you push back, you're difficult. So for a lot of girls, they learn early on that anything fiery is perceived as dangerous. It's exactly what you're not supposed to be. So at a very early age, a lot of female fire gets dampened by politeness, by acquiescence, by being the prettiest and most sort of compliant version of yourself, because that's where you get the most approval. So what you learn to do, the learned behavior, is to learn to be humble, but still try and be visible. And this is what I hear from a lot of women. It's this balancing act. It's this trying to exist within this very narrow space of like, okay, I need to stay humble. Oh, but I also need to be visible if I'm going to, get anywhere in the company or in my career. I have to be kind because that's a massive currency for women. But gosh, I still need to be powerful. Otherwise, they're going to write me off. I need to be modest because women can't brag or be seen to have ego or ambition. But I still need to put myself out there and seek promotion. I need to be the hardest worker and the highest achiever. And that's, over the last 6 months of working with women, something that is kind of coming up more and more and more is that we put all of our attention into achievement, being the top student, being the hardest worker, being the one who responds to the emails at all hours. We're constantly earning our place through trying to prove our capability. And the burnout rates of women who have overachieved and pushed hard and tried to be everything for a lifetime are huge. I worked with a group of women who kind of said to me, listen, they don't have to worry about the glass ceiling because we're shattered before we even get anywhere near it. Because we've spent a lifetime as young women and now as adult professionals constantly feeling that we have to prove ourselves in order to kind of keep our place and, earn our acceptability within a system that, is oftentimes not sort of engineered for our well-being. So in many ways, for me, self-permission is around trying to kind of gradually repattern some of this thinking, some of this behavior, some of this conditioning to say, excuse me, it's okay, I'm allowed. What I see is this kind of post lean in era where women are tired. It's like, I don't want to push harder. I don't want to work it harder in order for it to allow me in. I want to kind of stand in myself and stand out. I want to be who I am and believe that that's enough to kind of create the type of career that I want. That involves standing out and standing up. And that is finding your fire. There is no way that you can do any of this if you haven't tapped into that sort of fiery part of yourself that is willing to move beyond, push towards a much more creative approach to your own career. It's a simplified sort and perhaps a very hopeful timeline that I've presented here in terms of a movement in a certain direction. I think, Sarah and I had a conversation around, I think particularly for mothers, caregivers, people whose responsibility extends beyond work. That's the piece that, we haven't solved for, we haven't acknowledged. And as many are coming out and saying, the world of work was created for people who had somebody else at home doing all of that. And when you have to do it and deliver in an increasingly demanding professional world, it's almost impossible. None of us is kidding ourselves right now that if we're hiding within a system, that system will protect us, because they will dump us the minute it no longer works for them. So beginning to come into yourself is, listen, we're moving through a crazy decade, which has heaps of opportunity, lots of challenges. It's going to require conscious navigation. And that is me telling myself that it's okay for me to progress in a way that I want, in a way that makes sense for me. It might not look like I imagined it would.
I'm going to use this, dear readers, listeners, as a pause and a little advert break to advertise the fact on the 29th and 30th of March, myself and Gillian will be coming together on an in-person day at the glorious Coombe Abbey in Coventry for dinner the night before, where we will be doing some work. It won't just be about wine or water, whatever floats your boat, into a day of how we practice, how we experiment, the work. So it's not just talking about this sort of stuff, it's looking at how you want to move forward, what you want to do, and how you want to craft finding your fire and keeping your fire going forward, and how you crack on with permission.